Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, doubling down. President Biden facing the fallout and defending his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan as Taliban forces take over.
The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated.
The chaos resulting in scenes like this from Monday, a plane packed with evacuees. This morning, as evacuations resume after a deadly day at Kabul airport, we have team coverage from the Middle East to the U.S. Third time's a charm. At least that's the hope for White House health officials who are expected to recommend a booster shot of the COVID vaccine for all Americans as early as next month. More on this latest effort to fight back against the fast-spreading Delta variant. Race against time, a grim situation in Haiti. The search for earthquake survivors now being complicated by heavy rain and fierce winds. A look at the devastation as Grace strengthens back into a tropical storm. And emotional exchange. Naomi Osaka leaves a news conference in tears after taking a question from a reporter. What the tennis stars team is saying about what happened and how it's renewing the conversation about athletes' mental health. Let's get right to those heartbreaking scenes out of Afghanistan. The airport in Kabul now reopened after descending into chaos Monday as desperate Afghans tried to flee the country. The Pentagon is now saying it will try to extract 22,000 Afghans who help the U.S. military and are eligible for special immigrant visas.
We want to show you this image that is giving us a sense of the desperation. Hundreds of Afghans trying to escape packed into a plane. Two U.S. defense officials confirmed that this photo was taken inside a U.S. Air Force plane heading from Kabul to Qatar on Monday. President Biden briefly returned to the White House from Camp David, defending his decision to withdraw U.S. troops, saying he does not regret the move and that the buck stops with him.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces.
We have a team lined up around the world to cover all of the latest developments this morning. Let's start with NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli, who is near Camp David. So, Mike, President Biden is back there at Camp David this morning. As we mentioned, he stood by his decision to withdraw, but he also placed the blame for the chaos on the Afghan government. What was the main message he was trying to get across with this address to the country?
Well, Joe, obviously the pressure was mounting on the president to speak out and speak out quickly. So he interrupted his time here at Camp David to head back to the White House, deliver those remarks to the country. And he made it clear that there's no regret on his part about his decision to end this so-called forever war in Afghanistan. He did say the buck stops with me. He accepted responsibility, but that doesn't mean he was not willing to share some of the blame. And his comments about the Afghan leadership and the capability of the Afghan security forces was quite striking. Take a listen to that part of the president's address.
The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves.
Officials are privately telling NBC News more about their frustration in dealing with the Afghan government over the past few months, about their efforts to try to get the Afghan government to tackle corruption, for instance, to take some steps, more steps with the Taliban to try to get to reconciliation in terms of the future of that country, none of which the Afghan government ultimately pursued. It's notable, of course, that the president has returned to Camp David, but another development, the White House press secretary Jen Psaki was supposed to be off this week. She's going to be briefing at the White House this afternoon, along with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, an indication of how the White House really needs to keep getting its side, its message out during this crisis.
You know, Mike, we are also hearing from former President George W. Bush. He released a statement late last night. He was, of course, the first president to preside over the war in Afghanistan. What was his message?
Yeah, remember, this has been a part of the President Biden's message about this Afghanistan decision, saying he is the fourth president to be dealing with the situation in Afghanistan, and he was determined not to hand it off to a fifth president. We did hear, of course, from President Bush, the first president who launched that war 20 years ago. And he said, of course, he's been closely monitoring the situation, that the president has promised to evacuate Afghans along with American citizens and our allies. He said the United States government has the legal authority to cut the red tape for refugees during this urgent humanitarian crisis. Remember what we've been hearing from Biden officials about the slow pace of processing those SIVs, of getting those officials and the Afghan allies out of Afghanistan. Part of the delay, they said, was because they needed Congress to pass a change in the authorizing legislation. And here's the former president making clear now, in the state of crisis, they have the authority to cut through some of that bottleneck.
You know, so much of the focus is on what happens next. A few hours after the president spoke, the State Department said negotiations are going on with reps from the Taliban and from the Afghan government. Tell us more about that, what the Biden administration would be trying to work with here.
Well, over the course of the past year, since President Trump initially made this agreement with the Taliban, the U.S. has had a role at what these talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government, we should say the former Afghan government now, in Doha, Qatar. Those talks have been continuing. But Ned Price, the State Department spokesperson, made it clear yesterday that just because the Taliban is now in control of the country, it doesn't mean that they'll have the full U.S. support and cooperation. And there are specific conditions that the U.S. is going to be looking for. Here is Ned Price spelling those out.
The fact is that a future Afghan government that upholds the basic rights of its people, that doesn't harbor terrorists, and that protects the basic rights of its people, including the basic fundamental rights of half of its population, its women and girls, that is a government that we would be able to work with. The converse is also true. We are not going to support a government that does not do that.
What has been so striking so quickly after the fall of the Afghan government is how some of the other key nations in the region are reacting as well. Russia, for instance, saying that it will maintain its embassy in Kabul, plans no interruptions there. The Chinese government also making it clear that it intends to try to seek stability in the region as well. We have heard from Taliban spokespersons, including one who spoke to our colleague Ayman Mohyeldin yesterday, issuing some interesting comments. They know the eyes of the world are upon them and promising that women and girls will have some of the same rights that they did under the previous Afghan government. But we'll see.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about China in just a few moments. Mike, I also know we're hearing partisan reactions out of Congress. The National Republican Congressional Committee is fundraising off the crisis while Speaker Pelosi is standing behind President Biden. But now Democratic Senator Jack Reed, who's chair of the Armed Services Committee, is calling for a hearing into what went wrong. What did he say the committee hopes to learn?
Yeah, it's really notable, the comments from Jack Reed. He's a longtime senator, now the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. He's not really a partisan bomb thrower by any means. And when he finally did issue a statement last night, it was striking that he took a much broader view of what he said was 20 years of crisis in the making. And he laid out some of the conditions he said led us to this moment. The first being the pivot, as he put it, to a war of choice in Iraq, the failure of a policy with, as he put it, duplicitous Pakistan, mission creep. We've heard the president talk about this as well, from a narrow focus of counterterrorism to the broader attempts at nation building. And lastly, the lack of an ability to build the Afghan government. We heard the president, of course, speak squarely to the frustrations there as well.
All right, Mike Memoli kicking us off this morning. Mike, thanks for your reporting.
For more on what's happening on the ground in Afghanistan and reaction from the rest of the world, let's bring in Ali Arouzi and Megan Fitzgerald. Good morning to both of you. And Ali, I will begin with you and just get a sense of what is happening on the ground now. I know we're seeing flights resuming in and out of Kabul airport this morning. What's the latest after yesterday's chaotic scenes?
Hey, Savannah. Well, after those extraordinary scenes yesterday of the runway at Kabul airport inundated with people running alongside moving aircrafts that were preparing to take off, people clinging to the undercarriage of the plane, falling to their death, some of them, and U.S. troops forced to open fire on some armed Afghans that breached the airport. Flights were suspended yesterday. The evacuation from Kabul ground to a halt, but this morning it has started again. Flights are resuming out of the airport. NATO's senior civilian representative to Afghanistan posted a video showing the runway empty with American troops on the tarmac. He wrote, "The runway is open. I see airplanes landing and taking off." And overnight, flight tracking data showed a U.S. Marine Hercules plane at the airport and then later taking off for Qatar, which is home to CENTCOM headquarters. So things are resuming. That chaos of yesterday seems to have calmed down, and there seems to be some semblance of an evacuation taking place and more control over the airport. So we'll have to see how that pans out through the course of the day.
And now, Megan, in addition to that U.S. flight that Ali just referenced, Britain has also been evacuating Afghan nationals as well as its own civilians. What's the latest there, and how's the U.K. planning to manage its relationship with the Taliban?
Well, Savannah, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said they will continue to evacuate hundreds of British nationals a day as long as it's safe to do so. They're also evacuating Afghans who are eligible as well. Right now, we know there's some 600 British troops on the ground there trying to make sure that this is as smooth and as safe of a process as possible. Now, as it relates to the Taliban, an official has come out and said that they want women to remain in government, also saying that women aren't victims. And the British government, I can tell you, is saying they are going to hold the Taliban to that and they won't accept anything less. I want you to take a listen to a British official.
We're using our G7 presidency to make very clear to the Taliban that we will hold them to account for their commitment and never to allow Afghanistan to be used as a base for terror, to hold a more inclusive government and to protect the most essential human rights, including respecting the rights of women.
But it's important to note that there's still great fear on the ground there in Afghanistan among specifically women and children, concern about what the Taliban will do next. You see how they're closing down beauty salons that women once worked in and frequented. They're painting over pictures of women without head coverings. So at this point, it really is a wait and see as to what the Taliban will do next. Savannah?
Yeah, Ali, that's exactly where I want to pick it up also with you. So multiple reports this morning say the Taliban has announced a, quote, amnesty across the country, though it's not at all clear what that means. And of course, there are reports to the contrary, but we're also hearing that they're urging women to join the government, which obviously sounds a little bit in conflict with the reporting that Megan just said and video that we saw, footage we saw ourselves yesterday. What can you tell us about that? And is there any indication that this Taliban rule would be different than the brutal one we saw of the 90s?
That's right, Savannah. A senior member of the Taliban's Cultural Commission said that the Islamic Emirate, that's how the Taliban now refer to Afghanistan, doesn't want women to be victims. He said that they should be in government structures according to Sharia law. But he also added that the structure of the government isn't entirely clear. And Savannah, I can tell you that many people, both in Afghanistan and the West, are deeply skeptical about these comments. They feel that there are hollow words or just a smokescreen to make sure that basic needs of the country function until they're in full control in various positions. Look, Savannah, the Taliban have a terrible track record. They've never shown any signs of wanting to reform or become more moderate. When they ran Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001, they were one of the most brutal, ultra-conservative, oppressive regimes in modern history. Stonings, amputations, and public executions in soccer stadiums were daily occurrences. Women had no rights. They had to cover their face. They weren't allowed to work. They were largely confined to their homes and only allowed to leave if accompanied by a male relative. And girls were banned from going to school. I mean, just yesterday, the UN Secretary General expressed particular concern about the future of women and girls in the country. So it's not the words of the Taliban that people are going to be watching closely, but rather their actions in the coming days and weeks.
Absolutely. Ali and Megan, thank you so much, both of you, for your reporting this morning.
General David Petraeus oversaw U.S. allied forces during America's longest war. NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt spoke with the retired four-star general on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and the Taliban's quick takeover of the country.
certainly the outcome, I think, is catastrophic. It's also heartbreaking. It's tragic. And I do think there were alternative approaches, options that we, in fact, should have considered. But we are where we are now. And I think what's most important at this moment in time is to realize that there are many that we have so far left behind. And we must do everything we can with all the resources available to us to ensure that we meet the moral obligation to them.
Was there any version of the story that did not end with the Taliban back in charge?
Certainly there was. There was a sustained commitment that could have been pursued. I think that it was really the psychological effect of our announcement of the withdrawal, then the actual withdrawal, and then very significantly the withdrawal of the contractors that kept the U.S. provided helicopters and planes in the air and showed the Afghan soldiers on the ground that there would be someone coming to the rescue. And if soldiers on the ground don't think that that is coming, then they're going to do what we have seen Afghan soldiers do in the past week. And by the way, Afghan soldiers fought and died in huge numbers over the course of the past 2 decades. So the idea that they wouldn't fight for their country is something that I think is just not accurate.
What would you say to American soldiers and their families who risked their lives, who sacrificed their lives, who came back wounded from this war? What would you tell them right now as they watch all this play out?
That they should be quietly proud that when our country needed them in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, that they volunteered to step forward and serve our country at a time of war. I feel enormously privileged to have done that as well, and indeed to have led them in Afghanistan as well as in Iraq.
Are we facing the same Taliban that was running the country up until the U.S. invasion, or have they evolved into something different?
I think they have evolved in the sense that they are more conscious of their public relations campaign. But I think the actions on the ground seem to indicate that they are the same old Taliban, that they're an ultra-conservative, medieval, theocratic organization that seeks to establish an Islamist emirate. I am fairly confident al-Qaeda and the Islamic State will be able to reestablish sanctuaries, but we will, without question, keep an eye on that, disrupt it, degrade it, and ideally destroy it when that happens. But that's going to be vastly more difficult given the distance from which we'll have to operate.
So you see a military role in Afghanistan, but really more from looking at for our own strategic interests rather than stabilization.
I don't see how we would get involved in stabilization of a country run by the Taliban, Lester. I wonder whether we'll even reestablish an embassy anytime soon. So, no, I don't see a role other than to ensure that we can identify activities by al-Qaeda and also by the Islamic State affiliate in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region when they try to reestablish the kind of sanctuary that al-Qaeda had when they planned the 9/11 attacks in Afghanistan under Taliban control.
Many U.S. veterans who served in Afghanistan are voicing concern and heartbreak as the world watches the Taliban's takeover of the country. Kristen Rouse joins us now. She is a U.S. Army veteran who served multiple times in Afghanistan and a board member of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Kristen, good morning. Thank you for your time this morning. And my first question to you is just, what has it been like for you as somebody who's been on the ground there multiple times to see these scenes unfolding in Afghanistan over the last few days?
This has been so hard to watch. So many of us have been in touch with Afghans who we have friendships with, relationships with, the interpreters we worked with, other staff who've been part of this 20-year enterprise to build a better Afghanistan, to build a hopeful Afghanistan, to work alongside Afghans in building a better country. Afghans have lost. They've expended so much blood and pain and effort in the effort over the last 20 years. You know, we've expended American lives defending so much of the ground that's been lost, and that has been so hard to watch. But the people that we invested in, so many of them are still alive, and they are trying to get out, and veterans are trying to get them out. If we want to preserve the investment, the relationships, the effort that we've expended. Please, we need to get our allies, our friends out before the Taliban comes from them. We are hearing reports that the Taliban is going door to door, identifying any Afghans who have worked for Americans in an interpreter capacity, but in other capacities as well, journalists, aid workers, government workers, and all across the spectrum. Any number less than 100,000 plus evacuees, we should be alarmed that it's not enough. I myself have been messaging with folks outside of the Kabul airport. I was messaging with folks in the chaos yesterday. We desperately need to get people out. We need to see as many flights filled with evacuees as possible. We have the aircraft. We need to be moving it 24/7 to get our friends out.
A message from someone who knows many of those people and who knows what it was like on the ground there. Kristen Rouse, thank you, of course, for joining us this morning, but more importantly, for your service.
Amid all the evacuations from Afghanistan, one country is holding off. China is urging its citizens to remain indoors in Afghanistan, but it is keeping its Kabul embassy open. Yesterday, the country's foreign ministry said China is ready for, quote, friendly and cooperative relations with the Taliban. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us now from Beijing. So, Janice, what else can you tell us about China's reaction to the Taliban taking power in Afghanistan? Why are they keeping their embassy open?
Well, a Taliban takeover in Afghanistan represents challenges for China, but also opportunities. And Beijing has been laying the groundwork for some time for these, quote unquote, friendly relations that they hope to establish with the group. This is a shift from the past. Back in 1996, China refused to recognize Taliban rule, closed their embassy there. This time, the embassy is remaining open, and officials told me yesterday that they are remaining in close contact and communication with the Taliban to ensure the safety of the few voluntary staff that they have left there. A lot of this shift started to happen even a few weeks ago. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi hosted talks in Tianjin, that's close to Beijing, with a Taliban delegation led by Mullah Baradar. They emerged from those meetings. They took pictures together. They released statements. And both sides seemed satisfied that the talks were productive. According to Chinese officials yesterday, the Afghan Taliban have repeatedly expressed their hope to develop good relations for China, and they look forward to China's participation in the reconstruction of the country. So at this point, it's not outright recognition of the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan, but it is cautious support, which is more than what most countries are extending right now.
You know, Janice, part of the story here is that China has strong economic interests across Central Asia and Pakistan. So is it worried that rising Taliban influence could affect them and impact those interests?
Undoubtedly, China has big economic interests in Afghanistan, massive investments in infrastructure, minerals and mining, as well as oil. So they're looking to protect those interests, but also looking to extend their influence. On the other side of it, too, the Taliban sees opportunity and economic benefit in cooperating with China, especially with the massive Belt and Road Initiative that is stretching across Central Asia. It's why, in meeting with the Taliban, China wanted to extract security assurances. Security is the main driver for China in this. They have fears of extremism on their border with Afghanistan and the western part of the country, specifically in Xinjiang. They were able to get the assurance from the Taliban that they would not have their fighters use Afghan territory as a base to launch attacks inside China. But Chinese officials say that they are now expecting to hold the Taliban to their word.
Yeah, and I mean, Janice, China has been criticized heavily for how it treats its Muslim Uyghur minority, a group that lives in that region right next to Afghanistan. Can we expect the Taliban to get involved at all there with that? And how would China react if something like that did happen?
Well, China's fear of extremism has been used as justification for its treatment and detention of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. They want these security assurances from the Taliban if the Taliban wants to have an economic relationship. But we have to remember, too, that China has been just as uncomfortable with a large U.S. military presence in Afghanistan. It's why China could see some strategic gain in the region with the withdrawal. The state media here has been having a field day, calling the U.S. withdrawal a disaster, painting it as the end of American influence. So China could stand to see some strategic gains. But again, they are at this point hesitant to say that they will outright recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government in Afghanistan. I put that question to the Foreign Ministry spokesperson yesterday. They did not give a clear answer, so I think we can safely call it cautious support. But again, China among the few countries giving that.
All right, Janice reporting from Beijing. Janice, thank you.
More devastation overnight in Haiti as Tropical Depression Grace slammed the island with heavy rains, complicating relief efforts after a 7.2 magnitude earthquake killed at least 1,400 people. The death toll keeps rising and more than 30,000 homes have been destroyed. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has the latest from Haiti.
Joe and Savannah, good morning. When we traveled to one of the hardest hit regions, we saw a hospital so overwhelmed that mothers were holding up IVs for their own children in the hot sun. And international aid organizations are having trouble getting relief supplies to some of those hard hit areas because of treacherous roads. And now the weather is not helping those relief efforts.
Overnight, Tropical Storm Grace drenched Haiti, raising more fears of flash flooding and mudslides, and slowing urgent rescue efforts after this weekend's powerful 7.2 magnitude earthquake. The Haitian government says the death toll is now more than 1,400 people. At least 6,000 are injured, many desperate for medical treatment. We traveled to Lakai, near the quake's epicenter.
This hospital is overwhelmed, and they've set up beds outside with men, women, and children hooked up to IVs under the hot sun. Some of them are still searching for family members days after the quake.
This man with a broken arm told us he was fortunate to survive and hoped he'd be evacuated. Another woman choked back tears as she wondered where she'd live now. The government says at least 37,000 homes here have been damaged or destroyed.
We're told that this was a massive hotel, 5 stories, where an untold number of people died. Local authorities are still trying to assess the damage, but some of the critically wounded are now being evacuated miles away to an airstrip where the U.S. Coast Guard is airlifting them to safety in Port-au-Prince.
This morning, there's mounting frustration in this impoverished country that is still reeling from past disasters, from the 2010 earthquake that killed hundreds of thousands, to Hurricane Matthew in 2016, to the assassination of its president just weeks ago.
The help has to come from within to start with. We need to organize ourselves. We need to stand up together as a nation to address the needs of our country.
And again, Tropical Storm Grace just dumped heavy rain across parts of Haiti's southern peninsula this morning. As the sun rises, the Coast Guard will be back in that area delivering supplies and evacuating some of those critically ill patients. Joan Savannah.
All right, Gabe, thank you.
Let's get a closer look at what's happening with Grace and also, of course, with Fred.
Bill Karins is tracking all of that for us. Bill, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. So much grief and misery. We'll get to Grace in a second. First, let's go to Tropical Depression Fred. This is the one that's over the top of Georgia, made landfall in Florida yesterday. And right now, the main concern is heavy rain. We could see isolated tornadoes as we go throughout the day. We do have a tornado watch that's up for the greater portion of central and northern Georgia, including the Atlanta area, until 1 o'clock this afternoon. The winds are not causing any more damage. They barely caused any damage anyways. This was always going to be a big rain threat. And then over the next 36 hours, this circulation will head over the mountains, and that's always an issue. any tropical system over mountainous areas, the moisture gets wrung out like you're taking a sponge over your sink, and that's the biggest problem. North Georgia, the mountains of North Carolina, watch out. We could have some really bad flooding later on today. We have 12 million people under these flash flood watches, including Asheville and Greenville and the Atlanta area. So how much rain are we talking? At least 1 to 3 inches, locally up to 7 inches. And then tomorrow and into Thursday, that rain goes all the way through West Virginia, Northern Virginia, Pennsylvania, maybe even New York City and the Hudson Valley eventually into Wednesday night. As far as Grace goes, it is slowly exiting Haiti. It's going to be heading over Jamaica during the day today. It is now back up to a tropical storm, and the heavy rains, though, are still sitting over Haiti. What you're looking at in white is the clouds. If you see the bright white clouds, those are the tops of thunderstorms. So that heavy rain is right still over where the epicenter of that earthquake was. So it's going to be hard for them to get some relief in there early today. Hopefully the Coast Guard can get in there later on this afternoon. And the good news with Grace, guys, is we don't have to worry about it in the lower 48. But for our friends in Mexico, this one could be heading right for Cancun and then eventually towards Tampico, Mexico.
All right, a lot to watch there, Bill. Thank you so much. See you next hour.
All right, so we've had Field of Dreams, the movie. Last week we had Field of Dreams, the game. Now we're getting Field of Dreams, the series. NBC Universal's streaming platform Peacock has announced the show. Michael Schur will serve as writer and executive producer. He was a writer on The Office and created hit shows like The Good Place and Parks and Recreation. The series will reimagine the original story of an Iowa farmer who builds, of course, a baseball diamond in the middle of his cornfield for the ghosts of baseball greats to play. Last Thursday, the New York Yankees played the Chicago White Sox in cornfields, where the original movie was set. The game was the most watched regular season MLB game in 16 years. Wow. So all in all, just a really good week for corn.
Yeah, yeah, and all right, NBC, striking while the iron's hot.
Yeah,
Everybody's talking about Field of Dreams. That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah, good idea.
All right, thanks, Joe. Now, a major announcement on vaccines is expected from the Biden administration as early as this week. A recommendation on a booster shot, that third dose of the vaccine, for all Americans, with a potential rollout beginning in mid-September. This comes after Pfizer submitted new data to the FDA from early clinical trials as part of its application to authorize COVID vaccine booster shots for the general public. The phase 1 trial showed significantly higher antibodies against both the original strain of COVID-19 and the highly transmissible Delta variant following a third vaccine shot. Last week, the CDC approved a third dose, but just for those with a weakened immune system. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins us now from Detroit, where one vaccination site is actually reopening its drive-through option to begin administering those third doses to those with weakened immune systems. Shaq, good morning. So first, just tell us about this vaccine site. What can people expect when they get there?
Well, this is a vaccination site that will open up at 9 a.m., and it's the largest one that is in the state. It's reopening to apply this third shot, this booster shot for folks. And it'll look pretty much what we've seen. It'll look like what we've seen before in terms of those drive-up vaccinations, except there'll be a few new questions that are being asked. You must be fully vaccinated, and you must be fully vaccinated within the past 6 months, or at least 6 months ago. That vaccine, you can only have the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. And they're going to ask if you have a compromised immune system. Now, they emphasize this does not require a doctor's note. There's not going to be any verification for that, but they want you to have a compromised immune system to come and get that vaccine dose. And you can come in and get that vaccine as you're driving through. Today's the first day that you can do that to get that third shot.
So, Shaq, is there a plan to sort of target or encourage those who are eligible, who do have those weakened immune systems, to come and get a third shot?
Yeah, and it folds into the incentives that you've been seeing in this city really for the past couple of weeks and even extending into some months. It's called the Good Neighbor Program. So if you come and drive someone to get their vaccine, including this third booster shot, you can qualify for a gift card, about a $50 gift card that you can get that the city will provide. So it's part of the incentives that you're hearing. We heard from the mayor yesterday pushing the vaccines. You're hearing from the health department. The concern, as we hear all across the country, is the rise of the Delta variant. While the surge here in Detroit and in Michigan is not what you're seeing in the South just yet, they are seeing that increase in cases. They are seeing that increase in hospitalizations, more hospitalizations than at any point since the beginning of June. So they're doing what they can to stop that rise as early as they can.
And, Shaq, how is Detroit doing in terms of vaccinations compared to the rest of the state?
Well, this city and this county really is lagging what you see in the rest of the state. While the state is about 59% or 60% vaccinated, at least partially vaccinated, the city of Detroit is just at about 42%, just under. The numbers, I have to say about, because the numbers are lagging a little bit in when they report their data. But, you know, the city is lagging what you see in the rest of the state. That has prompted an urgent push from the mayor. I want you to listen to how he described it and what he's saying about the Delta variant and the concerns that he has with this Delta variant.
Turn on the TV and watch what's happening in the South right now. And please, if you've got somebody in your life that's on the fence, they care about, get them in and get the vaccine. I'm telling you, nobody regrets having gotten the vaccine. There's going to be a lot of regret. This is going to be Michigan in a matter of weeks or months. And so this is preventable by getting vaccinated.
You hear his message there. This is preventable. He's saying what you're seeing in Florida, what you're seeing in the South could make its way here to in November if people don't take advantage of those vaccinations.
All right, Shaquille Brewster there for us an hour and a half before it even opens. Thanks for your reporting. We'll be interested to see what happens there today.
As Detroit moves ahead with booster shots, Texas is fighting over masks. Students in the state's capital, Austin, return to school today, but families there are caught in a legal showdown between the school district and governor over mask mandates. And it's not just an issue in Austin. Two of the state's most populous counties, Dallas and Bexar, defied Governor Abbott's ban on mask requirements. But on Sunday, the Texas Supreme Court sided with the governor, temporarily blocking mask mandates in those two counties. It's unclear what the ruling means for the city of Austin, where the mandate for schools still stands. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson is there in Austin outside Sanchez Elementary School. So, Priscilla, walk us through this legal battle. Where do things stand in Austin? And is it possible the school district there will also end up before the Supreme Court there?
Well, Joe, that's certainly a possibility. As you mentioned, the Texas Supreme Court did issue a temporary halt on those mask mandates in the Dallas and San Antonio area until they're able to hear arguments. Well, less than 24 hours after that Supreme Court decision, a lower judge in San Antonio did hear arguments and issued an injunction, essentially reinstating the mask mandate that was issued at the county level. And so this is sort of the complicated play-by-play that is happening on the ground here in Texas. Now, as for Dallas, they have a court date coming a little bit later, but the school district there says they're going to continue to implement their mask mandate until they are named in these court orders by name, naming the school district, not just the county. But what we're hearing from state officials is that that ruling should serve as a reminder to everyone. The Texas Attorney General tweeting in part after that decision came out, quote, "Let this ruling serve as a reminder to all ISDs and local officials that the governor's order stands." So this is a very complicated patchwork of dozens of local mandates and very school district specific mandates across the state that is making it quite confusing for parents here.
Yeah,
Joe?
and with all that confusion and the back and forth, I mean, what are parents saying about these mask mandates? How do they feel about it?
Right. We saw a rally just yesterday at the state capitol with folks who were opposed to Governor Abbott's executive order. And what we heard from those parents is that this is all very confusing. They're trying to make decisions about their children's future and what they're going to be doing this school year. And these mandates and conflicting messages have not made that any easier. Here in Austin ISD, when they announced their mask mandate, more than 700 parents changed their child's enrollment from virtual to in-person learning. And so it's unclear what the district is going to do if that mandate goes away and whether those parents will then have the option to switch again. So making it far more complicated in terms of planning for an already very complicated school year, Joe.
Yeah, so very quickly, I mean, what does that mean for students? Can they go back to remote, or are they going to have to be in school potentially without masks?
Yeah, so that really depends on what school districts across the state are doing. The Texas legislature did not actually fund virtual learning this session. And so here in Austin, they're saying that it's going to cost $40 million to implement virtual learning, and they're figuring out how to pay for that on their own. But other school districts are not defying the governor's order, so they're not requiring masks, and they're also not offering that virtual learning option because they simply don't have the money to do that in a robust way. So it would appear that certainly in some areas, kids are going to be going back in person without those mask mandates, Joe.
All right, Priscilla Thompson reporting from Austin. Priscilla, thank you.
It's time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
CNBC's Frank Holland is with us this morning. Hey, Frank, good morning.
Right. Hey, good morning, guys. First time I've seen you guys together in a while. So we're going to start with some airline news. A lot of people that couldn't get together with the people they wanted to be together with. Spirit Airlines says the cancellation of more than 2,800 flights over an 11-day stretch this summer cost the airline about $50 million in lost revenue. Cost also soared. The budget airline had to pay to put some stranded passengers on different airlines, also put some of them up in hotels. Spirit says that service meltdown, which started in late July, has led to more, even more last-minute cancellations. It will reduce flights the rest of this quarter, which ends in September. MGM Resorts is set to become the first major casino operator to require COVID vaccines for all of its employees. Well, not all of them exactly. The company says starting at the end of this month, it will require all new hires and current salaried employees in the U.S. to be vaccinated. MGM's new policy won't impact currently employed hourly workers, but it says it is looking at ways to expand this new vaccine requirement. Well, you'll soon be able to find and rent Spin electric scooters on Google Maps. Starting this weekend, you can see the nearest available Spin e-bike or scooter in real time, including how long it'll take to walk there. But to pay for the scooter, unlock it, and then obviously go for a ride, you still have to go on the Spin app. Spin, which is owned by Ford, is available in more than 80 cities in North America, Europe, and on many college campuses. They look like a lot of fun, a little dangerous for me, Joe. You're kind of tall too, but still looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I started doing the scooter thing for a story a few years ago in San Francisco and found that height is not great on those. So I'm also a klutz.
Right, exactly.
Frank, thank you so much.
In the pandemic era, comfort food is king. Stressed out Americans are looking for easy and familiar meals to feed themselves and their families, often opting for to-go orders.
Now, while restaurants struggle to adapt to this new fast and casual reality, some are wondering, is the fine dining experience dead? NBC News senior business reporter Ben Popkin has been looking into that question. Hey, Ben, good morning. So when we think about fine dining, we think these white tablecloths, maybe candlelight. Is that all a thing of the past?
Well, good morning, Joe and Savannah. Good news. Fine dining is by no means dead during the pandemic, but food critics and chefs I spoke with said that some trends that were already underway are accelerating. So what we're seeing is a lean towards food that is sourced as locally as possible, emphasizing plants, simpler fare, and a slight touch of casual. Back in the day, they might not have let me in, but they would only let you in, Joe. But that era is long gone where French-based cuisine dominated servers and spats carrying silver trays. Think restaurants like 11 Madison Park in New York and Atelier Cren in San Francisco as exemplifying this new trend.
All right, so let's talk about the other end of the scale. Americans have really taken to fast casual dining. I guess I kind of had to Google what fast casual is. So it's like your Chipotle, your Shake Shack, that kind of thing.
Something in between.
Is it a matter of being cheap and
Applebee's.
easy or something else going on here?
Sure. Well, I mean, we all know people are exhausted. They're sick of cooking for their families 3 days, 3 times a day. So they're getting drive-through and delivery. And it's also for COVID protection reasons. Customers have been opting for these low-contact options, drive-through, curbside delivery. But this demand is pushing restaurants to quickly adopt some of these new technologies, invest in a better drive-through and line-busting experience apps. They're seeing it take off. They're investing more, and that's attracting more business. So Applebee's planning to add more drive-throughs. Wendy's and IHOP's looking at potential ghost kitchens that they're only drive delivery only. McDonald's, other fast food chains pushing higher value combination meals for that family meal deal.
And now, beyond just customer preferences, whether they want that fine dining or fast casual, the pandemic has also clearly just shaken up the business side for restaurants. They're facing labor and supply shortages. I've definitely noticed this in some restaurants that I like no longer being open for lunch, things like that. How is this affecting what they offer?
Right. You're absolutely right. Being closed for lunch, that's one of the moves these restaurants are making as they're dealing with those labor shortages. So many restaurants, they're reducing their hours, they're slashing their menus, paring it down to what they can source. They're really in that pandemic rock and a hard place, facing higher customer demand and higher costs for food and labor. So restaurants have been experimenting with delivery. You've seen high-end to-go boxes, pantry services at some of these fine dining restaurants. And they'll even offer video classes, which is cool, where they'll teach you how to prepare the meal that you just got yourself at home. But it sounds fun, but you do have to deal with, prices are going up, and so is the amount of time you might have to wait for your food. And the server who brings it to your table, you might be a little bit more frazzled. So next time you go out to eat, you might want to bring a board game and a hefty tip.